When it comes to labels defining sounds in a particular genre, they're arguably just as important as the artists themselves. Almost every innovative artist has had a strong label behind them. Labels like Aftermath Records, The Elephant Six, XL Recordings, all of which contributed a fresh take to their genre with the artists that they would pick up and the sound that they would define. And this is no different on the internet, where labels are popping in and out all the time, bringing innovative styles and artists to the forefront. Though a lot of the time when these internet-based labels pop up, they usually keep chugging along until their audience either loses interest or they stick with their dedicated fanbase. But despite having that dedicated fanbase, they usually fail to expand upon the vision that they started off with. Though in Dreampunk, there was a label that seemingly had the world in its hands. Not only did it put out great albums, but they were hugely influential in both the packaging and distribution of physicals. Then, when they had everything they could ever want, they vanished. Nothing. No word at all to this day. Today, we're going to be talking about Bludhoney Records. Alright guys, now before I get into this whole story, I need to address my part in this whole situation. For any of those who are familiar with either me or Bludhoney Records, you'll know that I've released 3 albums on Bludhoney. This, and this. Despite this, however, I will try and address myself separately from both the story and the label itself, but I will address them when I feel it's necessary. All of this is just so I can be as impartial as I can, because we're going to be getting into a lot of stuff. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's get into the story of this enigmatic label. Alright, so back in 2014, Vaporwave was at its cultural peak. It had been bigger than it ever been, and it had seen tremendous growth. But along with that growth came a slew of artists who came to reinvent the genre. And one of those genres that came out of Vaporwave's peak in 2014 was the ambient-filled, introspective-themed Dreampunk. The genre was originally spearheaded by the talented artists on the Dream Catalog label, establishing the early canon of the genre with albums like Birth of a New Day, A Heart Full of Love, and the Hong Kong Express records. Now, I don't think I need to go into how immensely successful and influential these albums were. In fact, I did make a whole video on it. It's up here. But what I will say is that along with this early canon and the subsequent experimentation that Dream Catalog were taking, there was an explosion of both labels and artists coming onto the scene. This included artists like myself, Sangam, and Rashida Prime. But of course, with artists coming from all over, there needed to be labels to house these artists. However, while a lot of labels would come on not just to Dreampunk but also to Vaporwave, they would typically stick within their own realm and sound, very rarely going outside of that sound to experiment. Save for Dream Catalog at the time, this led to a very stifling environment with just regurgitation of sounds and visual aesthetics that refused to evolve. Now, that's not necessarily bad. If you can master your sound and master what you're good at and keep an audience around, all the power to you. But for a lot of audiences that were coming onto the scene just as Dreampunk was exploding, they were looking for something a bit different. They wanted a fresher take on certain aesthetics and sounds that were going on at the time. And this is where Bludhoney comes in. Bludhoney began in 2016 under Cujo, and right from the get-go, they tried to hit it out of the park with a release that shot for a huge audience. The soundtrack to the incredibly popular indie game, Hyper Light Drifter, produced by the immensely talented Disasterpiece. This album not only resonated with a lot of gamers, but it was also just a fantastic album altogether. This set Bludhoney on the path to notoriety, as now everyone was forced to pay attention to this brand new label. And the key part is that not much of this fanbase was from Vaporwave or Dreampunk. They followed it up with the release of Ozcob's Overgrowth, which was another immensely popular release at the time. At this point, Bludhoney were doing everything right as a fresh, new, and exciting label. So with the eyes of much of the music and gaming industry on this label, what would they do next? After Bludhoney received immense notoriety thanks to Disasterpeace's debut, the interest and output of the label soared. Artists from all over the internet found interest in the label, not just because they were willing to experiment with their sound, but also because they had an innovative approach to physicals. And it's here that we saw Bludhoney become home to a newer generation of Dreampunk artists coming onto the scene. Artists who didn't come from Vaporwave and were solely inspired by the Dreampunk essentials that had come before from the likes of Dream Catalog, No Problema Tapes, and BLCR. And yes, I was one of those people. After I had released Lonely Streets on Crystal Tone Records, I was contacted by the label personally with regards to putting together a track for a compilation album they were putting together. From there, Jeremy and I discussed putting a full-length album on Bludhoney, and just like that, Hold It Together was born. Along with Lonely Streets being ported over shortly after, these releases were incredibly successful. With a music video being made and a great physical package, it drew in more eyes. But of course, it wasn't just me who had good work on the label. The likes of Kubrick's, Tsunami, Coastal Dives, Rashida Prime, Sangam, Jacob Newman, and QMDX, everyone was on hand to help make Bludhoney grow. QMDX's album at that time probably marked Bludhoney's most successful release up to that point. An album that takes all of the foundations of Dreampunk and turns them to 11 with dreamy but very emotional melody progressions coupled with the perfect use of Foley and, of course, the very striking cover. Bludhoney was becoming very good at many different things during this time, like elevating the standards of physicals by using things like obi strips and creating 2 different limited editions to create more hype around specific releases. And of course, along with that, the amazing sounds and artists that the label brought. But the thing that I found them most skilled at, by far, was their branding. On every physical piece of media they ever put out, you will find their logo. Their physicals, their Bandcamp, their albums, their trailers, their live streams, even the little wax stamp they put on the labels. Now the question was, how could they transfer that branding to a new label? And could a label like that survive without the hype around Dreampunk? Chamber 38 was actually created in the same year as Bludhoney, just a little later. However, it wasn't too clear what kind of sound they wanted to push the sister label in. It kicked off just like how Bludhoney did, funny enough, with an Ozcob album, Eating Yourself Alive. Now, in the more traditional sense, you could describe this album as Broken Transmission, but still within the realm of Vaporwave. But still the direction was unclear, and they went dormant from November to March. It finally broke its silence with an incredibly ambitious project between Mesh's Zone Eater project and Sea Dogs. The result was an interesting mix of noise, metal, glitch, and yes, even some Vaporwave influence. This record is one of the most ambitious albums I've ever heard. An album that tries to implement so many different parts from other genres together and make it sound cohesive. And in my opinion, I think it works extremely well. It's not too one-sided on either side, and it always leaves you in anticipation of what's going to come next. With this record, along with the output that was coming out of Bludhoney at the time, Chamber 38 was developing a reputation for a off-the-wall, noisy, experimental label that could do whatever they want. Maybe they were able to do this because of the setup of the label, giving it hardcore SCP vibes in terms of its branding. Like almost every bit of Anomaly containment facility was a whole new beast, which gave it a free rein to do whatever they want. And holy shit, they did just that with their most popular release by a country mile. Y'all Cowards Don't Even Smoke Crack by Viper.
What's up? I don't give a fuck. You boys run up, I'll be quick to bust. What's up? I don't give a fuck. You boys run up, I'll be quick to bust.
There's a lot to say about this record, but honestly, I want to keep it brief. As far as I know, it's essentially a meme album filled with tracks that have okay beats, but for the most part is a lo-fi, incomprehensible mess. Now, I know that's going to offend a lot of you because I know that there are a lot of fans of this album, but that's just how I feel when it comes to it. Now at this point, this had become the most successful album that Bludhoney or Chamber 38 had ever put out, and it was only a matter of time before it got a great physical package. But it's here that the cracks began to show for what was happening underneath the hood. Alright, now before I get into all the issues that were happening with these labels, I need to say that I talked with as many people as I could about this, people who were involved, including Cujo himself. So I thought I would just preface this whole section with that. In June of 2018, the vinyl orders for the immensely popular Viper record, Y'all Cowards Don't Even Smoke Crack, was announced. Of course, this would come with the fantastic package that Bludhoney was becoming known for. So the orders came and went, and needless to say, it got a lot of people excited. But as time went on, people weren't getting their records. And as more months went on, people still weren't getting their records. Unfortunately, it seems that as more and more time went on, people came to the conclusion that they might have gotten scammed. It took 1 full year before there was an update. And unfortunately, it was only for a delay that would never come. Of course, this was just a mishap on Chamber 38. They would get over it, right? Well, no. In fact, Chamber 38 would disappear with no word at all. Despite this, however, Bludhoney, well, they were thriving. While all of this controversy was happening, Bludhoney was putting out records that would lead the label into a vibrant new direction, with QMDX, Sangam, and myself pushing Dreampunk and ourselves. Releasing vinyl packages that were stellar, even releasing alongside the legendary noise artist Merzbow. And with the Merzbow record, Bludhoney got an even wider audience. And right when Bludhoney were on the precipice of reaching something great, to become not just one of the top labels in Dreampunk and Vaporwave, but all of music, they disappeared. The last release that would come out on Bludhoney would be Tsunami's sophomore record on the label. After that, nothing. No word on anything. No word on social media, no releases, no physicals, no announcements, absolutely nothing. As time went by, people began to notice that Bludhoney had disappeared, that there were no releases coming. The series of vinyl that was supposed to pitch together 2 artists with completely different sounds, gone. And as an artist that knew what was going on in the label, a lot of it was just kind of sad. There were so many cool things that were promised that just never happened. And as time went on and people began to forget, slowly but surely, some controversies came to light. Murmurings had come out that some of the artists didn't actually get paid for the royalties of their physical releases. This included guys like Tsunami, who, to be fair, did get cleared up, and Sangam. Other news came in that there was severe miscommunication with regards to artists and the labels and the releases coming up for those artists, such as how there was supposed to be a vinyl release for QMDX's record and deals that were falling through with guys like Kuriyami. Slowly, more and more people were growing discontent with what was going on, with albums that were promised and not showing up, and orders going missing. Something needed to happen. Now, there are a lot of pieces of what happens next, so I'm going to try and go through it in a way that makes sense. Publicly, Kujo addressed some of the issues in a post in the Vaporwave Cassette Culture Facebook group. This post somewhat goes into what was going on behind the scenes. Things like Viper's behavior when it came to contracts and merchandise, and on a more personal level, how he had allegedly threatened the owner of Chamber 38, Sophie, physically and in a number of ways. All negotiations between the two parties had broken down, and allegedly, Viper had fraudulently put in false claims to PayPal, which froze the C38 PayPal account. To this day, the money involved with the Viper release is still frozen in that PayPal, and they're apparently not able to access. Needless to say, Sophie, the owner of Chamber 38, was dealing with a lot. Unfortunately, the misfortune wouldn't end there. Kujo would get extremely ill. Now, it's not clear exactly what he had. I talked with the owner about a lot of the issues that were going on, both in his life and with the label, and it was clear that, in confidence, there's a lot of stuff that was happening both with his health and other stuff that I can't really disclose. From his own mouth, well, his IRL life was kind of falling apart. There were numerous issues that were happening outside of his health issues, and unfortunately, he just wasn't able to run the label and deal with all the issues that were happening with it as efficiently, mainly because he just felt overwhelmed. Now, I think it's important to note at this point that you can't attribute everything that was going on with the label to that cause, because at the end of the day, there was also a lot of mismanagement issues. Things weren't running smoothly, and it was clear that some mistakes were made. But I also think it's important to contextualize just how huge the label got in such a short period of time, and the fact that it was only ran by a couple of people. It's a lot to handle even without medical issues and someone allegedly trying to blackmail you. But maybe that's the lesson from all this. If you fly too close to the sun and aren't prepared, you're gonna get burned. Every now and then, there's been hints of Bludhoney coming back. Changes in design here and there, maybe a tweet over there, but nothing concrete. So I get the question whenever I'm playing a show or whenever I'm in a chat, what happened to Bludhoney? Well, I think at the end of the day, the only way that I can describe it is a perfect storm of shit that just went wrong. On almost every level, from external threats to mismanagement to human error. But I think most people who ask that question, they don't do it in a negative way. They do it in a kind of longing way. Bludhoney had helped innovate the scene and had a fresh and new approach to record label crafting that blew everyone away. From the sound they chose to have on the label, to the innovations in packaging and physicals, and finally to the incredible diverse cast of artists they chose to support and believe in. Bludhoney weren't afraid to go out there and experiment with their sound and physicals, and it shows. And we can only hope that if they do come back, they'll be ready with something fresh, just as the moment they left. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry this one took a little bit longer than I wanted. I've been really busy with a lot of different things, both musically and work-wise, so I do apologize for that, but I really wanted to put this one because it required a lot of research, interviews, and stuff like that to do. Either way, it was a blast to make. Thank you so much for everyone that talked to me regarding this label and the music and everything surrounding it. The next video that I do, I think I'm going to try and go in a different direction as far as sound and scenes go. It might not be limited to the Dreampunk scene. Regardless though, I also wanted to let you know that we now officially have a Dreampunk subreddit. So that's reddit.com/Dreampunk. We have full ownership right now. Myself and a couple other people are going to be putting some twists and turns on it to make it real fancy, and really have a nice community hub for anyone who's a fan of our great genre. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys subscribe, and I'll see you next time.